And then I always like to talk about growth, because growth is essentially important, because initially after you go through that completion process in terms of the fulfillment, and we know how the delivery is going to look like, and how critical that is, and particularly because once that completion plan is operating as you envision from the business plan, usually you start to see client referrals. So you start to see some form of growth, and growth is good, because usually in our business, you service the clients in a proper manner. Usually within about a year or two, you can really count on about maybe 3 referrals from that particular client. And so, in particular, when you see growth, a lot of times we look at growth not only just from a position of revenue or profit, but also to client acquisition, but also to having that mindset when it comes to growth, that client is a client for life, and that we need to embrace them as such, and particularly in terms of the relationship, and how do we manage it, and dealing with some of the challenges that growth presents for all of us, and particularly as business owners. So one of the things I always like to mention with growth does, it presents itself with its own sets of challenges, and particularly what I like to say, that comes to managing growth. And so when you look at it, and particularly for myself, I like to say we had some challenges in 2000. We've grown every year. And of course, in February 2020, we were all faced with COVID-19 or coronavirus, and the changes with the state and local government. And for myself, I was just looking at how would we reposition, or how would we reapproach our business? How would we pivot? And so in terms of managing that growth, I'm just going to take in a moment here to kind of talk about my journey. One of the things that we were looking at was, if you just kind of give you the news at that particular time, initially, a lot of the news reporting that was coming out was about adult care centers, nursing homes, and the pain that they were experiencing. And so with that, I found myself going, okay, people are concerned about family members, and particularly the sandwich generation, particularly, they're either taking care of their parents, and then they're raising their children as well. So a lot of my material information was started to be centered around not only that sandwich generation, but women who are usually between late 30s to early 50s, and particularly, not necessarily that it was designed around age, but the reason why I was saying that is because a lot of women outlive men by 8 years, and they would be the last line of defense for before assets would be returned over to the next generation. And so with that being said, I spend a lot of time talking about long-term care, and really spend a lot of time just kind of, I've always immersed myself in particularly in that particular topic, even when that industry was considered a dying industry. And so I spent a lot of time talking about it, and particularly venues, and people started inviting me to share more and more information about it. And particularly, they just gave our office more credibility, and particularly when it came to services that we offered. And so whether people particularly were concerned about not wanting to end up into an adult care facility, showing them the options that were available to them. So this was something that really made a difference in our business. And actually, it ended up being, in talking with colleagues, a lot of them talked about how horrible the year was for themselves, and versus what I've shared. And I said how it was definitely a pivotal year for us, not only from a position of changing our focus, but also what it did allow us to do was to obtain more clients than we've had previously, as well as we saw significant growth in our profitability. And so one of the things I always like to look at when how do you manage that change or manage growth? And so what I always like to look at is the systems and adjustments. And so, and particularly when I talked about those plans and how you manage the completion plan, and it all boils down to systems, the systems that you have, and particularly when it comes to just, if you take into account marketing I don't just look at it as just the action steps. It's a system that I've developed. And if there's a breakdown in the marketing, there's adjustment that needs to take place, then I need to look at the system. So if I look at marketing, and particularly, it wasn't necessarily a whole lot with social media for myself. And particularly, it was networking groups that I belonged to, and those were a lot of the opportunities that presented itself for the business, and we were able to make adjustments in our messaging and realizing that utilizing that outlet allowed us to get our message across to so many different people, because so many people were able to say they knew someone who actually, if they had a concern about long-term care, but talked about long-term care quite often. And I was able to receive referrals from it. And also too, again, managing growth, adjusting, we started with that 3 to 5 year plan, and particularly when we're creating that business plan, but how often do we visit it and how often do we update it? COVID should have forced all of us to go back and revisit our 3 to 5 year plan and make some adjustments. And what do you want your business to be at in another 3 years? And where are you spending sufficient? I like to call it the capital T. Capital T means time, and in those areas in terms of where you would like your business to grow. And then also too, just being able to understand and deal with the ebbs and flows of business, and not necessarily riding that roller coaster of the highs with the highs and the lows with the lows. But I think in particularly when there are the ebbs and flows of business, I think it gives as Warren Buffett like to say, when the market is on, experiencing a bad period, true investors run to the market and they run to the fire. And those who are I want to say retail investors usually want to run away from the fire. So I think in terms of it, I know for myself, I spent more in marketing in 2020 than I've ever spent. We've spent in business. So just looking at the ebbs and flows and what's going on, and just having that silent moment where you can just take time out every week to see what's going on, and not only just in the industry but also the landscape. In terms of what is going on, I think it's extremely crucial and important. And I always look at in people. On the subject of people, I think the business is extremely important, and particularly as entrepreneurs. And a lot of times, if you think about the growth that you are experiencing, you have very little time. You're going to interact with great people, and sometimes even as a solopreneur, even if you're working with you're working with people who you're outsourcing, whether it be a website or you're outsourcing, whether it be some administrative duties. You have to think about the energy that you put into your business, and particularly, and you look at the level of competency that you bring. So you should have a very small tolerance for poor people, and particularly in the level of value that they bring to the business, even if the work is outsourced, and be ready to make a very fast decision, the necessary decision. Usually they shouldn't last no more than a year, as I would say.